when I was at Shopee, I believe the first market they launched was Thailand, and I was there for that launch, which was, to me, was very, very insane, because when I first launched the Laura, it took us maybe 6 months to get to 3,000 orders. But when Shopee launched Thailand, and the first day itself, they were doing 3,000 orders, right? So now that's when you want to talk about second mover advantage, secondary effects, and all these kind of things. So that's kind of the context where Rocket kind of came in, spent the money, built the infrastructure. Welcome viewers, welcome listeners to Momentum Works Answering the Why series. Today I am Alex. I will be your host. Typically, I'm the host of EOA, Entrepreneurs of Asia, a podcast platform that talks to founders, investors, and entrepreneurs. But I'm here today with Momentum Works, good friends. They have a new content series. They have quite a few interesting products that they are introducing. And this is one of them that I'm most excited about, because I've been doing content for a while. And I think for my platform, it's complementary. And for the name, I guess, answering the why, right? I think that's a very important question, especially for the Southeast Asia tech scene. In my experience building ventures and what Jianggan's been doing and what Alfonso's been seeing, right? It's a key skill that founders need to have. Why? This is something entrepreneurs will always ask themselves to figure out root cause, analyze, introspect, and develop. And this applies to the broader themes that we're seeing in Southeast Asia. Why Southeast Asia? Why the trends? Why the news? Why the concepts, leadership, etc. So the general idea of the concept and format that we're developing is, we're going to introduce a topic and a theme, maybe have a thesis about it. Momentum Works has a really great product on reports that Alfonso has been developing, which we hope to use as some, extra information and to help enrich the conversation and dialogue. And then we'll have a few questions to discuss around it and try to keep it as concise as possible for everyone to learn and hopefully positively impact the community. What do you guys think? Is that about right?
Oh yeah, very interesting.
Anything I missed that you might want to add in?
I think I've captured everything. So
okay, great.
So of course we've been blogging, we have been sort of maintaining some community groups, and to a certain extent that some people think that we're a media company, although we spend most of our time building ventures and sometimes consulting for other companies. Yeah, so I think over the past year, thanks to the extraordinary situation we are in, so we have been managing to actually sit down and think about the sector, think about what we have seen or what we have done in the past few years, and also come out with a few very systematic assessments that Alfonso has been leading. So hopefully that self insights would be useful for you to think about what you do and what you're investing and where you spend your resources on.
Yeah. So, we're sitting at the center of all these intersecting communities, and what Momentum Works has done is really great, in terms of the reports, which I think Alfonso can highlight in a little bit, the blog, which is more of the more recent news, concise happenings that are very relevant, and the community, which is now you are building an app and a platform called Impulso, which is Spanish for momentum. It's being developed in beta, and I would welcome everyone to visit all these products and to continue with this series. And for today's guest, and I hope I could be a regular guest going forward on this. Then Jianggan, maybe you could spend like 10 seconds, 15 seconds, who you are and what you're doing and why are you here, and same for Alfonso.
Oh, I'm Jianggan, and I've been building ventures since in Southeast Asia since 2013. Yeah, it's been 7 years. From the days where you have to literally give your users smartphones for them to use smartphones, to the day that I think I'm in Singapore, and this year after the COVID, you see like people start everyone's scanning using QR code. Electronic payment is really prevalent. But I think I used to work with Alex on a few ventures across the region. We remember the days when things were really, really different from what we see today, and things have evolved a lot. And of course, there's lots of bullish sentiment about the region. But of course, coming from a builder background ourselves, so we always want to look at the market as it is, because we need to actually do the work, right? And we need to avoid being overly optimistic about things, but we also need to avoid being overly pessimistic, and we need to seize the right opportunities at the right time. So Alfonso has been an observer of many things for the last few years, and he's from Chile. So also I think something you guys might not know, that I think Chile and Singapore are only two countries which historically didn't feel enough quota for the migration to the US, which where Alex is from.
Yes. So I think, well, the most important part I think is Jianggan is the CEO of Momentum Works, and then he's leading the whole effort here. Alfonso is a part of the team, and then yes, I think the point is very international, and I hope in a future series there will be more international guests, more international topics that are tying back and related to Southeast Asia in general. And Alfonso, who are you and why are you here?
Well, my name is Alfonso. I work in Momentum Works as the head of insights. Basically, my role here is to make sense of data and to basically to produce amazing insights, try to digest a bit all of this complexity of data that we have, and to try to create trends and to make sense of the companies, the data, and how they relate with the macroeconomics and all that. So it's a complex thing, but it's very, very interesting.
Basically, you're a very important person that I think people should be connecting with you. You're at the intersection and you're looking at things, analyzing, kind of like a Ben Thompson of Southeast Asia, I guess. Hopefully, we can get you up to that level and spotlight, and people start looking at your analysis and your reports and looking at this content and series more seriously, right?
Oh yeah. But I think that the Ben Thompson reference is for Jianggan, not for me. I'm just the one that is creating data and insights and all
together.
that.
It's a team, right? It's a team.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's dive right in. So very quickly, last week, for the last two episodes, there was some content covered. Can we concisely say in a minute or so, what was the main impact? What are the main takeaways and some of the quick lessons that you guys talked about, and how does it kind of connect into today's topic, I guess?
Let me take a step first. So we're looking at I think one of the major things which happened this month was the shelf IPO of Ant Financial, which was supposed to be the biggest
yeah, that was a big
in
deal.
history. I think it was even bigger than Saudi Aramco, but it was stopped last minute, and of course that sent shockwaves across the financial market. But it also made people think, okay, what made this company what it is today, and what are the sort of lessons that we can learn from its journey, but also what are lessons we can learn as investors, as regulators, as startup players. What are the things that we try to replicate, and what are the things we should avoid? So I think Alfonso also gave some very, very nice pointers about in terms of infrastructure, in terms of connectivity, in terms of human capital, where we are in Southeast Asia. So maybe Alfonso, you can just elaborate a little bit on that.
Yeah. So the idea was to understand a bit what is the context in Southeast Asia, and to also try to understand why there is this kind of big boom in terms of investing in Southeast Asia, because everything seems to be growing very fast. Like you have the internet penetration growing fast, you will have the smartphone penetration also growing very fast, and also GDP is growing very fast. And basically you start to question why this is happening in Southeast Asia, why Southeast Asia is like the chosen one or something like that. And some of those questions can be answered in a positive way, but in some other cases, basically the region is still not developed enough in order to sustain some sort of products. So we have like different kind of very sophisticated products around offering services, digital services, and in some cases, people wonder why this company is successful or why this company failed. So basically, that's why we try to understand. And in the case of Alibaba, I think that it was very interesting to understand what is the role of the regulations and basically how Alibaba how Ant Financials needed to cooperate with the regulators in order to actually improve the regulatory environment of the country itself. So it was a very interesting conversation.
Yeah, definitely. It sounds like very broad, technical, complex topics that are very hard to tackle impactfully within a short time period. So yep. I think what we could do is point back. If you look in the description or see the links popping up, you could just wherever here or somewhere, you could go back and watch those episodes. I think they're, will be worthwhile at your time if you're interested in the space and some of those topics, like, infrastructure that's not there, but then there's some very advanced structure, and then the nature of the markets and how things turn out is very relevant if you want to look globally these days. I think people are always talking about looking inwards now, but I don't know. I think when things bounce back with the vaccine and the economy happens, these kind of questions and the why Southeast Asia and why Alibaba and all these kind of things are going to be very relevant, especially if you want to invest in scale or build in a region to one of the largest, fastest growing markets in the world. That's very exciting, right? And so for today's topic, I could maybe bring up some of the questions we're going to be looking at, but the topic is, let me see. How did Shopee overtake Lazada in such a short span of time? A very loaded question, so I'm very interested to get into this. And then let me bring up the actual questions that will guide us. We may or may not get to these questions, but we're definitely going to be addressing a lot of them. Yeah, there we go. So why do you say that Shopee has overtaken Lazada? I think that's the most important question. I think that's going to set the tone for the thesis. I think, to understand, so that it's not loaded, what data are we looking at? What metric are we looking at? How can we confidently say that Shopee has overtaken Lazada in what kind of way? Because, I could definitely talk to a few of my Lazada friends and they'll definitely make the other argument the other way. So I'd be very curious to see what Jianggan has to say about that. Why did Garena start Shopee when there was already Lazada? Basically, it's a very interesting, broader question, more like why should any competitor start if there's a big entrenched guy that's already monopolizing? What did they see? I guess we could talk more about that. Shopee's success wasn't that obvious at the point of the IPO. Another loaded question. I'm not too sure. At that point, I think at least a lot of people that I knew really thought Shopee was already like a done deal and they were going to overtake them. So I think another interesting question that could guide us. And the last question, hindsight biased about Shopee being successful, of course, right? So what can potential investors or even builders or founders learn and where to identify the next Shopee, right? So without further ado, Jianggan, why don't you just start off by giving us the thesis? Can you prove to us that Shopee has overtaken Lazada?
So, Alex, I think while I speak, I might ask you questions because you were involved in one of the earliest efforts in e-commerce in Southeast Asia. So,
and Shopee as well.
To a certain extent, yes.
Yes.
Early days as well, yeah. I think for those who are not familiar with e-commerce in Southeast Asia, I mean, Shopee and Lazada are two of the major platforms and spanning across the region in all the major markets. Lazada started a bit earlier, I think in 2012, incubated by Rocket Internet, brought in investors, I think including Temasek as well. So in 2016 was acquired by Alibaba, who started this transformation, and with technology coming in, with people coming in, with the seller base, with the experience, etc., etc. Shopee itself started 2015, and initially I think it made it big in Taiwan. Then where Garena had the large user base, and also the timing was kind of interesting. And then afterwards they went to Indonesia. They got super big in Indonesia, and many people have been questioning, okay, is the business model sustainable, because they were subsidizing a lot, free shipping, etc., etc. And for friends, especially our friends, you compare the two platforms, you sort of see the difference, right? I mean, Shopee looks very lively, or as some people call it, like low class. So it's not as classy, it's not as clean, it's not as compared to Lazada. So
okay, so that's. Are you saying this is like from Singapore users, or where are you hearing this from?
The users around us, right? I mean, people who are sort of decently well educated, have good jobs, and middle class and above. I think
no, there's a point. There's a point of contention, at least for the middle class in Malaysia, of my circles, which could be a bubble, right? A lot of them actually prefer Shopee. I mean, like, look, so man, you just unpacked a lot of things there, right? So. If I don't know. Do you guys want to talk about the context of the e-commerce at the beginning? Because I have some thoughts there, or do you just want to talk about the actual comparison of Shopee and Lazada?
I think it's useful to give some context because since we're on this topic and some of our users are familiar with what's going on now, and but I don't think
Okay.
many were in the early days of how this whole thing take place. And the point you mentioned about, okay, the people who prefer Shopee, this is actually interesting. So I suspect I mean, in my home country, China. So there's this platform called Pinduoduo,
Yeah, yeah, of course.
which grew really rapidly. I think their stock price, I think, grew by like 300 or 400% this year. Um,
Mm.
the interesting thing is that people are saying that, okay, Pinduoduo is for people who are from small towns, from rural areas, from sort of some of the like relatively like lower income groups. But the reality is that there are lots of people from the well-educated, the well-off, the wealthy groups who actually use Pinduoduo a lot. But funny enough, when they discuss with their friends, they would refuse to admit that. I think that's something to do with this like East Asian face thing.
Huh, that's a very, I mean, yeah, I mean, you're going to be more of the expert in terms of China, what's happening in terms of that and the behaviors, but that is very fascinating to hear. And I mean, that speaks to the broader discussion of e-commerce in Asia. And I've had this discussion with the ex-CMO of Lazada Malaysia, who was eventually the group SVP. And he was discussing, some of the broader trends of what's happening. And we talked about India and Amazon and, what's going to happen in the future for e-commerce. And, at least for the story of India, Amazon, they were doing really poorly against Go-Kart early on. And then eventually, because Amazon just does what they do, they started taking over and dominating tier 1 cities, but at the same time, Flipkart. Then Flipkart lost market share in tier 1, but they were still holding on to tier 3. But then I think that's slowly even eating away as Amazon continues to grow the scale. And then, we kind of made this other, I guess you could say, projection to Southeast Asia in terms of what Alibaba is going to do, what Shopee is going to do, and where the future of e-commerce goes. That I could point you to also to the episode I did there, but I think that's also interesting. We could probably go with, but let's start with the context, right? So end of 2011, when I first started this Zalora, right? That was the first major e-commerce project that Rocket brought outside of Germany, which was Zalando, which was very successful. Within 18 months, they got to 1 billion revenue. Then the Samware brothers decided to launch that in the iconic Australia and Jabong, India, right? So these were the big major e-commerce waves. Back then, and what our friends in our networks tell us, that no VC was willing to spend $5 million on anything, right? And back then, when we first entered the market, no one trusted putting a credit card online, and payment systems were very janky. And, you had to spend a huge amount of money, which only Rocket probably could have brought and done, to kind of inject the first capital of e-commerce. So Zalora launched first, and then 6 months later, on the heels of that, Lazada launched. And there was a lot of early sharings because we used the same backend systems, we shared the same processes, we shared the same 3PL contracts. There was a lot of early synergies, for 6 months or so from when they launched, plus 6 months. And then eventually got to be, very complicated because they started doing the fashion vertical, and there's a lot of competition, and being Rocket, it was very aggressive. But the main point is that what Rocket understood and knew is that there was an arbitrage opportunity, and they had to blitz scale in order to get the first mover advantage, right? And I think they had done that really well. And Lazada had more, at least from my viewpoint, Lazada had more of this solving a pain point for more of a mass, where people in the countryside couldn't get a TV or refrigerator because they didn't have a mall near them. Whereas fashion for Zalora was more of this kind of luxury thing. If they couldn't afford it, they'd only wait for the discount and they just go buy their clothes on offline. So really, you're talking about people who look at offline and online and are very opportunistic versus people who actually need products. And I think Lazada was able to, one, be more aggressive eventually, spend more money effectively, get the market share. And on the heels of that, I guess, then comes Shopee, which I was actually, so I'm not too sure about, I think you're friends with people from Shopee better than me. And so you might get better insights there. But when I was at Shopee, I believe the first market they launched was Thailand. And I was there for that launch, which was, to me, was very, very insane, because when I first launched Zalora, it took us maybe 6 months to get to 3,000 orders. But when Shopee launched Thailand, and the first day itself, they were doing 3,000 orders, right? So and then now that's when you want to talk about second mover advantage, secondary effects, and all these kind of things. So that's kind of the context where Rocket kind of came in, spent the money, built the infrastructure. And the only reason why Shopee and I talked to the guys who were on the ground from Rocket who joined Shopee. They only believed something this big could happen because Garena was behind it, right? And Garena made the name in gaming, and Forrest Lee was a name to be reckoned with, and a guy who you knew could get it done. So a lot of these Rocket guys from Lazada actually got behind it and launched. I guess they already took the learnings from Lazada and then just basically injected it into Shopee, and they kind of went with a different angle initially. They were more open marketplace. They were looking at fashion, at least Thailand, very early on. The fashion team was very big. They were looking at Instagram influencers, and then they got one niche, and then they built teams to other categories fast. And I guess, if you want to talk about context, that's at least from what I know and my experience.
I suppose that we can add additional points is that when this happened, like many things were increasing very fast. Like you have the smartphone penetrations increasing very fast. You have also like things like tablets and also laptops. But I think that one of the main differentiators of Shopee against Lazada is that they also use a strategy that was focused in the smartphones. So that is interesting because in the case of Lazada, they were using smartphones, but also like computers too.
That's a very good point. They launched the product only on app first, and it was only probably much later after launch they actually had the web client. So they were, you're right, their strategy was very different, and I think you're right, the trends at the time were in their favor, and that's when rideshare was taking off, right? That was right after I think I had left Easy Taxi with Jianggan, and smartphone transition, like you said, was everywhere. So that's a very good point.
Yeah, and I think that it's even more important because if you think in the different possession of the digital devices in Southeast Asia, you will see that like Southeast Asia in the path of growth, basically they jumped from like mobile phones directly to smartphones, and the penetration of PCs and laptops is very low. Basically, instead of having like a high penetration of computers, they have as high penetration of smartphones. So if you think in shopping, what they did, it makes a lot of sense because they did the research, and this is also one of the good things of entering late, that you have additional information. They realized about this, and they saw that smartphones was higher in terms of penetration, and computers were very low.
Information and infrastructure, right? Even like logistics cost, like the whole wave. I mean, so after e-commerce was very big and Shopee was doing well, then the secondary effects is that everyone started investing in logistics companies, and then you start getting all these type of I forget, our friend Daniel, he did the Rocket Uncle, which is the one that didn't work out, but then you have all the other ride shares that doing delivery now and last mile, and I think that's a very good point. And I'd be very kind of curious to know, is there any data that you looked at pointed to more of a core value proposition? Like, for example, like why did Zalora not get as big as Lazada? And then, for example, then why did Lazada get those big? And then why did Shopee then take over, right? Is it because of this leap of smartphone penetration, you think? Or is there anything about this?
It's a mix of different things, right? So for example, Jianggan just hinted a bit of the kind of website that they use, the kind of app that they use. So one thing is the positioning, right? So with the positioning of Shopee, they are clearly targeting a different kind of target audience, right? They seem to be targeting like a more like the average guy in Southeast Asia, while in Lazada they are targeting a different kind of people, right? And it makes sense because, for example, if you started your business in Singapore, you may assume that the rest of the countries are going to operate in the same way, and that's an error, right? So I think that is one thing. So you have the positioning, you have the mobile boom, that is also another thing. What else? So for example, I think that when Shopee actually started, they began actually using a lot of promotions. So I think that is also that makes sense, because when they started, Lazada was already like decreasing the level of promotions and all that. So I think that fits perfectly like the level of salaries basically that Southeast Asia has. So it is not so high. It is not like Singapore. So you have like in Vietnam, like the average, like the median disposable income in Vietnam is like 500. per month. So it tends to be very low. So yeah, you basically you can wonder how you are going to be like acquiring different kind of digital services with that kind of salary.
Yeah.
I think that's an interesting point here that people tend to make assumptions and especially when you are required to move things at a fast speed that sometimes you don't really do the sort of research or whatever. I mean, as thorough as you probably need to, but you tend to believe in, let me launch fast, and I'm going to believe the data from a test, and I'm going to adjust. I mean, that's the mantra of many internet companies, right? And of course, people are sort of people tend to also like look at, I mean, the people around them, so what kind of customer profiles they are and stuff, and this would usually be the starting point. And I think, unless you probably see like lots of investor meetings where investors say that, okay, this looks interesting, but I don't think any of my friends will use it. But quite sometimes, you know, that, I mean, the investors and their friends are not representative of the masses.
Correct.
Let me give you I think two examples. First is that, I mean, there's this Chinese company doing short video, competitor of TikTok, called Kuaishou, which is fighting for IPO in Hong Kong now. I remember back in 2016 when I was in Beijing, I was talking to a few investors, and you know what's the message in the street? Oh, there's this app which has 200 million users. I've never heard of it. Like nobody has ever heard of it, but it had 200 million users. Why? Because all the users were in small towns, were in the rural areas, which were connected to the internet for the first time. And it was interesting that I mean, the Chinese New Year afterwards, 2017, you know, lots of this like, you know, fund managers, investment managers, startup founders, key employees from Beijing, from Shanghai, from Shenzhen go back to their hometown, which are in small cities and stuff. They said, wow, all my high school friends around me are using Kuaishou.
Yeah.
So that's still shocking, because it's so easy for you to miss the mass market.
I mean, there's a few important things there, right? So it's like, from an investor standpoint, it's those cognitive bias and mental models that you have to deploy to avoid that. And we could extend this further into the current discussion, which is, you know, with Shopee and Lazada. What was the secret that Shopee knew then that supposedly allowed them to take over, right? Because, you know, Lazada knew the secret that, you know, they had to move fast and take the market because no one else was going. It's a high barrier to entry. The Samuel brothers kind of pulled it off, and they were able to sell to Alibaba. Alibaba is the only ones who probably could sustain it, and, you know, they have at least for Lazada, it's a very multi-decade exercise of creating value and building the ecosystem, right? And I, you know, even I would suspect that even Alibaba would argue, you know, let Shopee do well, because that's only going to benefit Lazada too as well, you know. And, you know, we're talking about, in theory, a user, you know, a broad market of 600 million people that's growing. You know, of course, the total addressable market will be growing over time out of that 600 million. It's not totally that now. And a big part of that probably could be a rural strategy even, right? So what do you guys think? Is there any element? No. So I think first we should probably set the stage, you know, has Shopee taken over Lazada? And is there a secret that, you know, that what Jianggan talked about, rural China, does it apply to rural Philippines, rural Indonesia, rural Vietnam, that e-commerce can further grow into? And my instinct says, you know, we're barely seeing the tip at the beginning of e-commerce. This is just, you know, entering the fourth chapter of many chapters to come. So what do you think? So has Shopee taken over Lazada? And then can we talk further about the strategy?
I think the first question is that I do speak with some friends who are working as a stock analyst in firms in the US, and if you remember the share price of C Group, which is the parent company of Shopee, they went for IPO in 2017, and for about 2 years it barely moved. It barely moved to a certain extent that lots of early employees, they said, okay, this hasn't moved for almost 2 years. It's never going to move. Let me sell it. And of course, that was before it rose about 15 times over the last year and a half. I mean, who knows, right? I mean, you can say it's a mistake, but people really say that, okay, here's Lazada, back to Alibaba, almost unlimited firepower. can Shopee fight against can Shopee fight against it effectively, and besides, I mean, Shopee is losing money, and I think even the last quarter results, it still shows that the loss is widening. So and of course Alibaba is a profitable company, and it's able to subsidize if it chooses to. I think they invested like almost few $100 million in Redmart, which is part of their grocery delivery service in Singapore alone, and let alone the bigger group and other countries. But when I talk to this equity analysts, and I think there's a shift of sentiment this year, and people start to believe that okay, Shopee is ahead and it's the biggest company, so it's the biggest e-commerce company in Southeast Asia in terms of GMV, in terms of visits, in terms of downloads of their mobile apps, in terms of basically the measures we can think about, right? And so that part, I don't think there's any
doubt.
I
see what you're saying.
Yeah, but the question is that, is this sustainable? I think that's that.
I mean, I think you're talking to people who are looking at things backwards, historically 2020, right? So of course, the Shopee has proven on a metrics level, which it's the same thing, you know, can Grab even be sustainable to something that creates value? Can they find their core value prop and identity, et cetera, right? And it's kind of silly because the users on the ground would tell you that they just look at their behavior. Who do they use more, Shopee or Lazada? And at least for me in the past few years, that shift has been huge, shift to migration to Shopee, at least my circles again. Again, it could be a bubble, right? So I guess what you're saying is like if you're to break down financials to financials, I think, you know, Shopee has to report. Lazada, I don't know if they reported under Alibaba numbers. Then you could see then probably Shopee is for sure bigger. And you're talking from financial metrics, from analyst metrics, this kind of stuff. So I guess on that point we can't say that it's not, but then it's more of a question of, you know, is it real and is it sustainable, right? Alfonso, what do you think?
Well, I'm going to try to answer your second question about the secret, but well, I don't know if this is the secret, but I think that it's because they aim the population correctly. They aim the target audience in a better way than Lazada. And for example, promotions work in Southeast Asia. So why those promotions work in Southeast Asia? Because, well, people who, like the average salary is not that high. And also, for example, if you think in terms of what is the kind of products that are sold in Shopee versus Lazada, you will see that in Shopee, actually the variety of products that they have, like the selection, tends to be lower end products. Basically, it's not high electronic products that tends to be much more expensive. So obviously the margins are going to be lower, but they're going to actually be able to pull up higher number of transactions. And in the case of Lazada, it is the opposite thing. They are concentrated in basically quality over quantity. So that is also something interesting. And the other thing is basically how Shopee is approaching the target audience. And I think that they have been able to create like different versions of their app in order to adapt it, to localize it to the different countries. So I think that is very interesting, especially considering that in countries like Indonesia, there are like 700 different ethnic groups, or you have like in the entire Southeast Asia, for example, there is no dominant religion and all that. So I think that all of these points that the region of Southeast Asia is so diversified that you need to approach it not with just one tool.
No, of course, yeah.
Multiple things in order
it's not one Asian
to do it. So what is the secret? What is the secret? I think that the secret is to understand better the target audience, localize, and to basically to provide lower end products, basically cheaper products. I think that is one of that is basically the solution, and they managed to do that basically by selecting products that are not going to be like the most sophisticated ones. And I'm not saying that they don't sell this stuff. I'm saying just that the selection of products that they choose is in categories that are not so expensive, such as high-tech electronics and all that. So that is one of the reasons.
Well, I would only caution against the comment about discounts. I think discounting is a massive strategy that's been employed by Rocket Internet from day one. And I would argue that if Rocket Internet had been comfortable with setting on a smaller valuation and not trying to make themselves so rich, been less aggressive on the discounts and accept a smaller market, we're looking at a very different e-commerce behavior and different kind of scene that we're seeing today, right? I think that, and because it's like you said, is this still sustainable? And still a very big question needs to be answered. And I think what Rocket has done has made everyone addicted to discounts. And to be honest, that culture is literally the same thing from Shopee. Shopee was started from Rocket guys. It's literally the same company, but on steroids, but a different flavor. Very similar culture when it was started, when I was there. Very aggressive, quite political early on, and all these kind of things. And that's aside the point. But I think the point is like, I think, from Lazada to Shopee, the whole discount thing is a continuation that we have trained the users to expect. Right. And I think what happened is, both players, suppliers, and everyone's getting more, savvy about this. When big discounts come along, 11.11, 12.12, 1.12, whatever, right? Prices tend to be jacked up before. And then at least for the things that I'm shopping for, there's not much of a discounts that you're seeing, unless it's like for categories that, people are trying to move stock for that they don't need anymore and something else is in season, right? So, to your other points, though, I think they're very valid. I think it makes sense. And what you're basically speaking to the success of e-commerce in general. And I think why Shopee has probably done massively better was assortment, right? And I've been I was not been a big shopper in e-commerce for a few years ago, but the past year, heavily using both Amazon, Lazada, and Lazada and Shopee. And one thing Shopee has getting right is the assortment. They cover more products, even more esoteric things than Lazada. And arguably in those categories that are critical, where they have the advantage of assortment, the prices are lower than Lazada. Where Lazada is winning for me, at least from a consumer's perspective, is that they have a better product and operations. So if I'm to order on Lazada, it comes to me much faster than Shopee. Shopee is not slow by any means. Within a few days, it's great, 5 days, a week. But we're talking Lazada's next day, 1 day, 2 days, more consistently or not. And I think that ties to supplier problems. The catalog is not as good as Shopee. And I think, why they could probably take over more is probably better assortment prices, like you're saying, right? And I think that's probably part of the secret, that they just have executed probably better, because everyone knows how e-commerce works in this day and age. It's just a matter of getting the right funding and store behind it and proving the numbers, which they kind of done, as Jianggan mentioned just now, right?
Right, exactly, yeah.
Yeah, Jianggan, you want to add to that, or?
I think strategy-wise, I can't remember whether you, Alfonso, mentioned that when you start later, you have this information advantage, right? I mean, many things become available, and you have people trying different things, and the buyers and the sellers are well educated, so you can, and if the earlier player can't occupy the whole market, then that's still, I mean, you haven't created that barrier that others can't enter. And if you say that, okay, this market is fully mature, and as in Southwestern markets, that there's some retailer would occupy, say, half the e-commerce market, then of course it's difficult for others to come in. But I do remember there was discussion about Lazada Vietnam, I mean, 70% market share, but the market was growing at like 100% a year. So your 70% could easily become
correct
35% if you don't capture growth.
What's very interesting. Like when I was part of the reason why I didn't continue with Shopee was because I wanted to move to Vietnam, but the dynamics with Garena, that Vietnam is their biggest market for gaming. And they have a very different structure and power structure for Vietnam. So even though me being Vietnamese American, I wasn't allowed to kind of go there. So I kind of, felt like, wow, this is kind of tough, So, but what you're pointing to is a very interesting fact that like Shopee still has room to grow further in such a fast growing market. And if Lazada's not careful, they could lose their grip, which we probably see in the same story over and over in different countries, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And also, I think Alfonso did this this illustration about population density in a region, which is something that we talked about before, but it's something that I think it's worth taking a look again and again and again. So when people think about a strategy, where are the consumers? And maybe Alfonso, you can explain more about that. But large chunk of the consumers are in a few bulk of
I
mega
remember that slide.
metropolises.
Yeah.
I mean, it's very different from China cluster of
Yeah.
cities. It's very different from US cluster of cities. And Alice, if you remember, like for taxi or for Uber in early days, you have city managers. I mean, for me, you have city managers. So but in Southeast Asia, you have big cities. But other than that, it's tough, like large rural markets. I mean, maybe Alfonso
Yeah.
can talk more about it. Yeah.
No, just to highlight that, yeah, the population density is an issue because the population is so unevenly distributed in the region that basically that creates a connectivity issue within the countries. And so if you compare, for example, China, that is highly connected, highly interconnected, basically that kind of connection reduces the cost of communications, of logistics, and all that compared to Southeast Asia. And what are some of the consequences of this is that, for example, you will have 50% of the population still living in rural areas in Southeast Asia, and that's basically half of the population. And also you have like just like around 40% of the people is still working in the primary sector, that is basically extraction of natural resources and things like that. So well, even if this has improved dramatically, this is the kind of issues that are still that the region is still facing.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Definitely. So let's do a quick recap of what we did cover. So I think the thesis that we're going off is, analysts in hard financial numbers, Shopee has overtaken Lazada in terms of performance, right? And the question why, so what we talked about is possibly second mover advantages. We've talked about how there's better assortment, possibly more aggressive pricing. And I think Alfonso alluded to this. I think the way they had localized and marketed, like I can't get that stupid Shopee song out of my head, right? And then Puakuchan, like what's that? The comedian Puakuchan, whatever, the Malaysian comedian. Like it's just, I think they had done that better, which we didn't really talk about. But I think that speaks to Alfonso's comment about how they understood localization better. And we didn't get to continue discussion about maybe how it extends to rural and the future of e-commerce, which might be another interesting topic to discuss in the future. But I think from what they did, in terms of strategy, from marketing, from pricing, assortment, and where I don't think they're winning, at least from my viewpoint, is Lazada is doing better in terms of operations. Product, even though the product morphs to be very Chinese and not good for my Western taste, it's still, once you get it, it kind of works. It's better than Shopee. So these are some of the reasons why probably Shopee did better. And lastly, we did talk about the hesitation of the IPO in 2017, where people sold shares and they didn't think that Shopee was going to take over, but I gave my view from ground up, and we were seeing people from looking it down, analyzing it, and the point is it's not always very clear, right? You have to look at all the factors, be aware of your own biases to kind of make those calls if you're trying to build something that's already existing, build something that's better, something that's going to be hyper competitive, right? So with that, is this about right? Do you think? Is there any closing remarks? Something I missed out, or you want to add?
No, I think it's okay. So we have the positioning, we have the targeted the focus on smartphones, basically because they knew that the penetration of smartphones is higher than computers. You will have the localization effort that is highly compatible with the reality of Southeast Asia, that is highly diversified. You have the focus on promotions and lower end kind of assortment of products. So you can see how all of this fit together nicely with what's going on with the region itself, with the macroeconomics, macro environment factors. So yeah, those are I think that are the keys why Shopee basically is now leading. So,
okay, perfect. Jianggan, closing remarks.
Just one more thing. I think Shopee does it better with the female customers in terms of assortment, because I think of course all three of us are male, but I do believe that soft assortments.
I need to see the data on that.
You can see the data on that, and but I also think that it's a story that they've been telling the investors as well. So so that part, but of course, and it's difficult for us to capture the whole picture of what exactly happened, but what we did is that the pieces which might be useful in the way you assess the market and you view the different players and plan your resources. Yeah.
Alfonso, perfect future report and analysis on female consumers in the e-commerce space and the power they hold. Right? That will be a very interesting one. And I think what we'll do is, I think there are some related facts and reports and content that MomentumWorks has created. We will link them below as well. So, definitely guys, stay tuned to the discussion for the next part of the series. Hopefully, I think it'll continue more than 8 parts, I think, or maybe we'll more to spin it off something else. But, stay tuned, please comment and engage. Follow us, and we'll be back for the next episode next week or some other time. Yeah.
Great. Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Bye.
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 We have more coming, so stay tuned for the next episode. So in the meantime, if you look on my right-hand side, these are the ways that you can connect with us and find out more about what we do, find out more about the enabler report. And you can also just contact anybody from MomentumWorks to find out more. And if you want to find out more about what's going on or understand what's going on in our mind, go to our blog. So until next time, I'll see you guys.